You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds. I'm your host, Brian Cameron. Zach Travalella is on his way, and we are joined today. I'm so bad at last names. David Neese.
You got it.
I got it. See, the legend continues. How you feeling, David?
I'm doing great, man. How about you?
I'm doing well. If you're not familiar with David is my first round draft pick. He's my golden boy on the PSN roster. Did a phenomenal work with the draft coverage this weekend, and does phenomenal work year in and year out with us. And to be honest, I haven't met people that are so in tune with everything draft until I met you and Anthony DeBona. You guys are like the Mel Kiper and Todd McShay of PSN. Like, that's how in tune you guys were into the draft this weekend. Before we go over the picks, how did you feel about the draft? How do you feel, everything went? I mean, we don't have to talk about Shedeur. Shedeur slid. We all have our opinions on it. It is what it is. But how do you feel overall about the prospects that the Eagles were able to gather?
Pretty good. I think they took a few shots that were unexpected by a lot of people who, follow the team closely and made, projections of who you thought they would take, or specifically at tight end, I think is a position that they didn't grab that almost everybody thought would be a high pick by them. But overall, like, to just kick it off with Jahad Campbell, they chose a player, the best player at a position that was very scarce and devoid of top tier talent. Like, I had Jahad ranked something like 15th, 17th in the draft, and I didn't have another linebacker on my list until the 80s or 90s, because that's the disparity and difference between the talent that he has and the next linebacker on the roster. So I think that was a big swing. I think they've taken a few of them like that in this draft, and I kind of liked the other picks that were more scheme and fit adaptation type pick selections, in my opinion. Like, Andrew Makuba is someone who I thought fit their scheme perfectly throughout the entire process, but once they let Chauncey Gardner-Johnson go, I think it became even more imperative that they take a player that, ilk there. He has a lot of the same skills. He has some of the ball hawking. He definitely thrives against the run, strong tackler. So I'm really excited about it, overall. I was surprised they didn't take a tight end, and I'm surprised they made 10 selections. But outside of that, I think it was a pretty good draft.
So before we go to Zach, you and Anthony, I want to say you guys were heavy on the tight end selection. Like, Ann was kind of, saying, hey, like, Dallas got it on his way out. Article after article, Dallas got it on his way out. And you projected a lot of times Mason Taylor to be the guy to come in Philly. The tight end position, I know Zach and I have spoke about this outside of the podcast, but how do you see this going now? Like, is Dallas Goedert this year's version of Josh Sweat, where they extend him on a one-year deal, give him a little more guarantee money, and let him walk next season? Or do you see the Eagles making a move for moving on from Dallas Goedert because of the tight ends that they signed to the roster?
I kind of think that they're going to move on because it takes two to tango here. You can want to keep him, but there's also a $14 million guarantee that has to be signed at some point. And he doesn't have any guaranteed money right now, but once that date comes, it triggers that. And I don't think they have any intention of paying that. And if they extend him, it would also be a lot different than every other move they've made this offseason addressing, the team. They've let everybody go who was aging and expensive in those roles. So I'd be a little surprised. I think they threw a whole bunch of darts at the position, kind of like what they did at the edge rusher. And maybe that's what you're going to see is a heavy rotation, or they make a trade for someone like Mike Mayer, who is still available via trade out there with the Raiders.
That's a fair assumption. Zach, how you feeling, man?
Feeling all right. Feeling not bad. Happy to be here talking birds. Happy to have the draft in the background now, so we can relax a little bit, unwind. I know David's been going crazy just with the sheer amount of content. Going crazy as in a work animal. Just putting out piece after piece, and appreciated all your coverage, David. Now we got to sit back, relax, and talk about it. So I'm looking forward to it.
I mean, we can't relax until after this week is over, just because of how yesterday went.
Man, what happened yesterday? I don't even know what you're talking about. I am relaxed. I got a margarita in hand. I am good to go.
So just to recap the draft, right? So Eagles' first round pick is linebacker Jahad Campbell. Second round pick is Andrew Makuba. They didn't make a selection in the third round. It got a little iffy around that time because it seemed like a lot of the players that they wanted or that we projected them to get were coming off the board. Round 4, Ty Robinson. Round 5, they have 3 players: Mac McWilliams. Oh, as my phone resets. I hate pronouncing names the wrong way, but I'm going to go with Mondin, the linebacker out of Georgia, Drew Kendall, and then round 6, Kyle McCord, Miles Hinton, Cameron Williams, and why does my phone keep doing this? As Francisco Lindor hits a home run. And APR, David's favorite guy that I'm pretty sure he's going to gush about at some point in this podcast. But out of this selection, I feel like, leading up to the draft, Zach and I spoke a lot about this, where it was kind of like, how he does this routine where he puts his team in position where they enter the draft with no needs, but they somehow, some way, they still get their needs covered. We didn't really, we knew linebacker was a need for this team before Zach Bond was here, before Nakobe Dean had a good season like he had. But with the injury to Nakobe Dean, it became a more glaring need that we needed somebody next to Zach Bond. Not too many people are sold on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. being that guy just yet. Why Jahad Campbell? Howie Roseman mentioned a couple times that he was a top 10 player on the draft board. A lot of people mentioned he should have been a top 10 player, but he slid because of the injuries to his knees and his shoulder. But why does Jahad Campbell make the most sense for this Eagles team heading into the 2025 season?
Me?
Sure.
Well, I think he's much more than just a linebacker. I think that off-ball linebacker is probably the position he'll thrive at the most, and it's what he did in college, and he likely will in the NFL. But he was originally recruited by Saban to be an edge rusher, and he has a lot of skills there to be a force as a pass rusher. So I think you'll see Fangio use him in a plethora of ways going forward. He can be a weapon off the edge. He can do a lot of the same things Zach Bond did. He is more of a Zach Bond replacement to me, or counter, than he is anything like Nakobe Dean. He is much more of that style of a weapon, and he's got that type of athletic pedigree, which is to say he has the potential to be an all-pro at some point. He has that much athletic of a skill set where he could do something like that. Prototypical linebacker, 6'3", 244, flourished with, I think he had 11 and a half tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 117 tackles. He was a real weapon there. So I think that's the kind of player that you're going to get, and I think it shows how big of a voice Fangio had in that war room to get a player and outside of the box that they normally select, because he's got a big plan for him coming forward once he's healthy.
How do you feel about the move, Zach?
Yeah, I'm excited. I think is if I had to just pick one
word.
You're
gonna end up saying the word comp that I want to say, but I'm gonna let you say it first.
Well, we've all heard, the idea that they're gonna look to potentially play him like Micah Parsons.
Okay, there we go.
And I think that's just the idea of it. Makes you want to drool almost, like to be able to have a player such as that. And you look at where he was supposed to fall in the draft, David. Obviously, you mentioned earlier that you had him, scattered right around that middle of the first round. I think a lot of people had him in a similar position. I typically saw between right around 13 to 17 often. And he fell, right? And so we know why he fell. There's the injury concerns. If this goes right, you're looking at a guy who just on talent alone can give you something, I think, pretty close to what Micah Parsons has given Dallas. And I think that's not, it's about him getting there, and about him, getting past these injuries. So if we're under the understanding that we're talking about a ceiling and not necessarily the first day one impact of what he's going to have, I think that there's going to be a lot of excitement to have around Jahad Campbell, but just thinking about his athletic profile and the way that he can be used under Vic Fangio, I mean, man, there's no shortage of excitement just thinking about how he's going to play next year.
And it's kind of similar to how Zach Bond played last year, right? Like that's what we're expecting to see, but out of a younger talent, out of a more explosive talent. And obviously the injuries are going to be lingering around him for until he starts and hits the field. But then heading into the second round, right? I know we're limited to time with David, so I want to take advantage of this. Andrew Makuba, why is he the guy to be that safety, to be the fill-in for CJ Gardner Johnson?
He has a lot of attitude. He could have come out last year, but he returned to the Longhorns for another season to prove that he was a complete player. He wanted to prove to the NFL and to the draft world out there that he was worthy of going in the second round. And that said a lot about him and his character. He flashed a lot of impressive coverage skills. He had 7 PBUs, 5 interceptions last season, which is the same style of play that CJ brought to the Eagles. And he's also a strong tackler. And I actually liked him more the year before for his play against the run. Like I thought he was just fantastic. He gets downhill really quick. He reads and reacts as fast as anybody. So I thought he was a perfect fit for the Eagles. And then when, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, when they let CJ go, it almost became imperative in my mind that they get him. I mean, he was just the perfect role player to just come in and take that job. I think a lot of people will think that that means automatically he's going to beat out Sydney. I don't necessarily think that, especially the way they rotate players in and out. Sydney has a lot of skills too. I think, what was he, a 3rd round pick? I mean, he comes with a lot of pedigree as well. And he brings a lot of physicality, maybe too much at times, which is something they're going to have to dial back a little bit. But I love the pick with Makuba for all of those reasons.
Yeah, I'd have to double down. And, again, just to reference what David said earlier, just the similarities between him and CJ GJ. I think that Philadelphia really enjoyed what he brought to the table as a player. But the issue that I think doesn't get talked about enough with Chauncey Gardner Johnson is just that there were a number of players who were understandably looking for paydays after the Super Bowl, right? Not just free agents, but this is the conversation that we're having currently with Dallas Goedert, right? So they never really reached that point where I think it got out there fully that he was looking for a payday, but I think most people understood that he came in kind of at a bit of a deal, almost prove it, if you will, even though it wasn't a 1-year deal when he came to Philadelphia, and he very much outplayed his contract. So you think about that, think about the fact that they won the Super Bowl. What's the next step in the process? The player then asks for a pay raise, right? So even though we never formally got that announcement out there in the ether, I think it's pretty understandable to think that there was going to come a time where he was going to ask for that pay raise. And effectively, Philadelphia got out ahead of it and not only avoided giving the pay raise, but also saved some money just on the player in general, right? So now you bring in a guy like Andrew Makuba, who can potentially, give you some semblance of what CJGJ did, not only as a player on the field and kind of a versatile jackknife of a safety, but on top of that, a bit of a rah-rah competitive leader in the locker room. Hopefully one day he will be. So, I think that there's a lot of similarities they see to CJ that they like. I think there's some differences between Makuba and CJ that they also like. And I think that he's going to have an opportunity to come in and really take one of these safety positions. You talked about Sidney Brown. He comes in with a good pedigree as a 3rd round pick. The team likes him. The fan base loves him. There are holes in his game, as much as I like Sidney Brown. Makuba is a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more, we love the hits that we see, obviously, from
Human missile.
both Blankenship and and also Sidney Brown, but we love sure tackling as well, and I think that's what Makuba is going to bring to the table a little bit more. So I think he's going to have a real opportunity. And just thinking about the playmaking ability of a safety tandem of Reed Blankenship and Andrew Makuba back there, not to mention that you're going to have Cooper DeJean and Kenyon Mitchell without CJ to take away all his interceptions. I think that we're going to be looking at a pretty interesting playmaking secondary next year.
A very interesting pick in Makuba, but I feel like it's gonna pan out just because if he's actually filling in that role. Sydney at times looked as if he was on the bubble with Fangio. I mean, they started McCullum over Brown several times last year, which I feel like a lot of Eagles fans were scratching their head with because that kind of move. But here's to hoping that either player figures it out, and then they bring that dynamic to the defense. The next move is a very interesting one because we're replacing Milton Williams, who had all the production. We know Morojo was going to have a good season this year because he was breaking out a bit last year. But Ty Robinson, a bit of I say this very respectfully, a violent player in the trenches. How do you guys feel about this move, and how you feel like he's going to fit in with the Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis?
I actually found this to be the first curious pick the Eagles had made. Watching him on film, he was a little slower laterally, which is something normally is not the type of player that you would see them select. I mean, he's not, bad at it or anything, but they normally look for more athletic players in that vein that can, move around much quicker than that. But he has a nonstop motor, and he can do something which they do put a very high value on, which is get pressure, interior pressure. And that is something he can do. Like you said, he's very violent in the trenches. He has an elite character. And he's another guy that this goes unspoken much, but somebody who they met with at the Senior Bowl, and they liked, his level of competition there. And that's something they have put a high value on in the past few years, including with Quinyon Mitchell the year before. I specifically asked him about that Quinyon, and he said that was a big reason of why they drafted him, because they saw his versatility. They saw how he could play against top tier talent. And it was something that they hadn't seen, with him being at Toledo, despite Sirianni, being roommates with his head coach back in college or high school, wherever it was. They still needed to see that on the field. And I guess Ty Robinson checked off everything they needed to see on the field there too. So it was a little curious, but in a position that they rotate so much, I think that he'll probably do really well at. And whoever is going to be beside Jalen Carter already is benefiting from single, line, as opposed to the double teams that Jalen will consistently have to deal with.
Yeah, he doesn't have that lateral quickness that kind of gives you that ability to move him around as much as some of the other chess pieces that we talked about the Philadelphia's like to use in the past. Milton Williams, if you were, but I like his ability just to get downhill in a minute. He just as much as he doesn't have that quickness left to right, in part due to his size, his athleticism, and like you said, his unrelenting desire just to push forward towards the quarterback. He gets downhill in a hurry, right? And that's what I really like about him. I think that he needs to work a bit on his longevity, on his stamina, build up that lower body a little bit more. Not only just give him some positional strength there, but, again, just to grind out some of those snaps. So we don't want to see him on the ground, right? We don't want to see him push, legs give out. He's on the ground. Now there's an opening especially in today's day and age where there's so many more mobile quarterbacks. If you have a guy who, and this is a concern that we've seen with Jordan Davis at times, which he's, to his credit, corrected a lot in recent years. But Jordan Davis not really having necessarily that push from first whistle to last, right? There's been the stamina concerns. I think they're a little less so worrisome in this case, and especially just with Ty not being as big a body. He actually came in a little bit lighter than I think a lot of people expected, which is a little bit troublesome when you talk about that lack of lateral quickness. But all being told, I think he's going to be able to put on that lower body strength. I think that he's going to be a little bit of a game record down the middle, and we could see more, even if we're not seeing necessarily that Milton Williams replacement, we could see some more movement along the defensive line for guys like Moro Ojomo because of this addition.
All right, David, I'm going to let you skip the line because I need to hear why this kid is going to be better than how people are seeing him. A lot of people are seeing him as he's a long shot to make the roster. But Antoine Powell-Ryland, the Virginia Tech product who had 16 sacks last season, why is he going to be a for sure addition to this roster heading into the season?
I think he's a perfect player to be a rotational pass rusher right off the bat. He's very effective in that role. He's got a lightning fast first step, man. I mean, he has a nonstop motor. He has good bend around the edge. And if you've seen the clips, you've seen his incredible spin move that he uses consistently to get past offensive tackles. He is slightly undersized, but one of the funnier things I remember him saying at the combine, they were talking about his arm length, and he's like, "I've lived with these arms my whole life. I'll answer to you that they were good enough to get me 16 sacks this past season." And at edge, arm length isn't quite as important as it is at like offensive tackle or guard or something like that. He's and again, like he said, he's lived with that his whole career. He's already adapted to overcome that. He has and Fangio liked him as well, but he is a little undersized, but he also does something Fangio likes, which is he's able to drop into coverage as well, and that is asked of our edge rushers, despite most of the fans not being able to stand it. It is something that he's going to require them to do, and he has been able to do that, and he sheds blocks really well. I'm a huge fan of him. I thought he was like a fourth round talent. They end up getting him, what is the sixth? Is that when they got him, sixth or seventh? At
Yeah, 6th round pick.
209. Yeah, so I was surprised he fell that far, but knowing him, this has just fueled him to even be more successful. I mean, he is a nonstop workout guy, which I think will fit right into the culture of the room there. And again, it's another position where, kind of like tight end, instead of replacing Josh Sweat with somebody of the same ilk, what they've done is they've brought in four people who can get production in different ways and a various, types of schemes and types of rushes. And they've changed it up where if it's a certain distance and down, they can bring in different players. They all have, different skill sets. So I'm really excited by it. I'd be surprised if he doesn't make the roster, but it is a deep position. They do have what, 6 or 7 edge rushers signed right now after Aziz and Uche, and they also announced him. I thought they announced him as an outside linebacker. I don't know that
That is
they
correct.
announced
Yeah.
him as an edge. So it will be interesting to see what they have in mind for him, because I would say that's not his position, but I would have said the same thing about Zach Bond, and 9 months later he was an All-Pro Super Bowl champion. So I'm not going to dispute anything that Fangio is trying to do with any of these guys.
Yeah,
Wow.
no, I think that's the key is in Fangio we trust effectively, and when you look at him and his player profile, this is another guy who you can move around a little bit, which somebody, my brother-in-law is a Rams fan, texted me about a Giants fan complaining to him, his new coworker, about the Eagles draft, right? Saying he can't believe how this is the Giants fan saying to my brother-in-law that the rest of the league keeps playing chess, or checkers rather, while Howie Roseman is playing chess. And that's not only true in his draft room and his, the way he's able to acquire free agency, but they keep acquiring like chess piece after chess piece in terms of guys who can like move around just like the queen on a chessboard. Like they can move any which way. You're talking about guys who are like transpositional. And this once again is true for Philadelphia. And they have an opportunity. And you mentioned that he was going to play outside linebacker. I think that in part speaks to the fact that we are going to see him eventually in coverage, which, like you said, the fan base doesn't necessarily love. However, what we've seen under Vic Fangio is it actually work. And so I think this is something that, when you talk about APR, you're going to continue to see fans embrace the concept because we've seen it work, whether you're, talking about Nolan Smith, whether you're talking about, even Josh Sweat at times last year, putting Zach Bond in a similar position, even though he's kind of more that middle all around linebacker. But, being able to drop guys off the edge into coverage, I think it's going to be an idea that Philly fans are going to warm up to more and more because we're starting to see it actually work. And to bring in a guy, like APR, I think is just going to even showcase that even more so. And what he doesn't, have in size, he makes up for in heart. So he's going to be a fan favorite, I think, from an early day.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. David, I know you have to go. I do want to say I appreciate you coming on. I hope we get to have you on again soon.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I wish I had more time this evening, but yeah, thank you for asking. I appreciate it. It was nice
No,
talking with both of you.
anytime,
Likewise,
man. We
man.
appreciate you and thank you for everything you do for us, man. Seriously.
Yes, sir. Y'all take care. Have a good evening.
You too, man.
Take
Go
care,
Birds.
David. All right, awesome. So that was David of PSN. The rest of the picks, it was a mixed batch, right? You have your a heavy amount of offensive linemen. We do actually have drafting an actual center this year, which could be lead to them having the backup center. I'm sorry, I don't know, I'm stumbling so much, and then two tackles, Miles Hinton and Cameron Williams, who are both larger than life, and then Drew Kendall a bit undersized, but if he's gonna end up being a backup center, it's just right. You text me on if could have been draft night the day after, but you mentioned how this is kind of like an embarrassment for riches because they hit on nearly, if not every pick, they hit on nearly 90% of their picks this year. But obviously they can't keep all of this talent heading into the season, and then also Kyle McCord, which I feel like a lot of people weren't surprised about. People were hoping that the Philadelphia would draft him. Another quarterback, they have DTR, they have Tanner McKee, who's finally QB2, and then now Kyle McCord. How do you feel like this draft will kind of lay out the groundwork for drafts to come for Philadelphia, where they're in this position where they're a winning organization and they truly can't keep every single talented player that they acquire?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a fair point. Before I touch on that, just to kind of go to the fact that this is how Philadelphia has drafted for years. What we've seen in this draft is kind of obviously they took a linebacker in the first round, and that's the first time that that's been done in decades and whatever. But I think when you look at the spirit of the draft, this is a lot of Philadelphia's same tendencies that they've had for decades, just shown again. You're talking about investing in the trenches, right? You're talking about investing in bringing in quality quarterbacks. The quarterback factory, bringing in McCord, who I had honestly as my fourth quarterback in this draft. To get him in the sixth round is insane value, is incredible value. So you can say that they don't need a quarterback. Obviously, they don't need a starting quarterback. Jalen Hurts is their quarterback. That's not changing whether Kyle McCord is on the roster, whether Shedeur Sanders is on the roster, whoever. But you don't need necessarily a backup quarterback because you think about we have Tanner McKee. Well, what happens if whatever happens, there's an injury, well, now you need a secondary backup quarterback. What happens if there's a team who kind of needs that a quarterback last minute, almost kind of a Sammy Sleeve situation? Well, now you have not just one but two promising young quarterbacks who not only can you move for more than you invested in them in terms of draft compensation, but you still have another sitting back with you after the fact, which is arguably even more valuable. So investing in the offensive line and the defensive line and the quarterback, and I think that there were a lot of repeat and recycled tendencies in this draft, despite the appearance of some new philosophies in there as well. But in terms of being able to hold on to these guys, that's going to be the problem where you see these drafts where Howie's picking 8, 9, 10 times, right? Especially with these later picks, is that you're just not going to be able to hold on to everybody, because if you're repeating positions like they are, and it's not that they drafted 3 offensive linemen, or rather they brought in 3 offensive linemen, because I'm including Holland Pierce, as Duck mentioned, who
He's a massive,
quite
massive
honestly,
guy.
he could be the longest staying presence out of all 3 of those linemen that we're talking
I
about.
agree.
He has the potential to stick around. He gives off the most, I would call it, Jordan Mailata vibes, in terms of being able to solidify his spot on the starting line despite his draft position. Which again was undrafted, which is incredible to think about. So just under Statland U, like there's going to be so many interesting names moving forward on that offensive line for Philadelphia. And obviously the big name is Cameron Williams. I'm excited to see what can happen with Cameron Williams. I want to see what their long-term plan with him is, and I would hope, if everything goes right, I think you're looking at Cameron Williams as your long-term right tackle, and I think you're looking at Holland Pierce as your left tackle after Jordan Mailata. That's what I envision with this. And obviously we're talking years and years and years before you need to move on from Jordan Mailata, but you have that ability to build towards that now, right? And then I don't even want to leave out, and forgive me for not having his name off the top of my head, out of Michigan, Miles Hinton, excuse me. Hinton has the most versatility out of all these tackles, right? He has that ability to play that swing tackle, which I don't necessarily want or think Cameron Williams or Holland Pierce can do as easily, right? So you have a guy in Hinton who has that athleticism to kind of move up into that second level. We know how much Philadelphia loves doing that. He can play that swing tackle role. But if Philadelphia wants to move ahead and try and keep Holland Pierce on the roster alongside with Cameron Williams, and they need to find a home for Hinton, and Hinton can't play, and they want to keep him on the main roster. They don't want to leave him on the practice squad because they're afraid of losing him. You can play him at that swing, and he has that increased versatility. So, I mean, probably if you're looking at it, you're probably talking about putting a guy. You think you put the undrafted guy on the practice squad first. Like, that's just what logic tells you, especially considering Cameron Williams' pedigree.
Yeah,
but man, is it a problem? Because
It's
I'm terrified even just by the thought.
it's a risky move to do so with a guy like Hollins, who has all the talent in the world. But again, like, it's a unique situation that Philadelphia, and you mentioned like how he's been doing this for quite some time, where he's adding this great tier of talent to this roster, and you make it, you make it. You don't. There was a kid that he was the edge rusher that I feel like we were super high on. Ended up cutting him. He ended up in Washington.
New England.
Was no that
You're talking about he went right after the what was that in round 5, right after they got Mac McWilliams, Braden Swinson out of LSU?
No, I'm talking about like back then the Eagles drafted him. But then like it was an embarrassment of riches because we had a stacked defensive line. We had to let him go. He ended up in Washington. I forgot where.
Hill. That was the fan favorite. Who?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was gone, and it's like that's a similar situation where you could see that happening. But it's unique, and like not to steer too far away from the topic at hand, but ironically, what I did want to talk about in the second half of the show is just what you mentioned, like Howie Roseman is and what Doug is mentioning in the chat. Howie Roseman has changed. Like, I remember we used to complain about, hey, like, sometimes being the smartest guy in the room could bite you in the ass, and it bit Howie in the ass with the Jalen Reagor pick, with the Andre Dillard pick, with guys who he was trying to find the needle in the haystack when he could have just been picking from the top of the haystack and get a top tier talent like a Justin Jefferson. It takes a lot of will and a lot of strength to put your pride aside like that, and in being in a position that he's in, and say, you know what, I'm doing this wrong. I gotta switch everything completely. Like, when in this draft, in every press conference, he mentioned Vic Fangio. This is the guy Vic Fangio on. This is the guy who Vic told me and sold me on. Like, he's listening to his guys to the core, and it's like, had we had this after that first Super Bowl win, we wouldn't have had aging veterans on a defensive line that couldn't really play much more. We wouldn't have had aging wide receivers. Like, we saw how he actually learned firsthand from his mistakes and do the complete opposite now. Like, we have a Saquon Barkley, which we wouldn't have had a long time ago at all. We have AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, which could have easily been JJ Arcega-Whiteside and Jalen Reagor. Like, this is a new Howie Roseman, and it's funny. You stop trying to be the smartest guy in the room, and you end up being the smartest guy in the freaking room. Howie's done an honorable job. How do you feel about what he's doing this time around after the Super Bowl win, and how he's turning the roster around in the right direction?
Yeah, I do want to talk about that. I want to acknowledge Duck real quick, talking about Pierce playing both tackle positions before we move on to that. Holland, he played right tackle his first year at Rutgers, 2022, right? He made the switch to left tackle the following season. And you could argue it's the difference between first year to second year, but the difference was drastic. He went from solid to arguably, dominant at that left side. So that's just the real quick note that I wanted to touch on with Hollins Pierce there, is that it's a big difference from him, that right tackle to left tackle we saw, him when he was playing at Rutgers. But in terms of Howie, forgive me, just to reshape the question again, just the difference we've seen in his approach, you were saying? Yeah. So
Yeah,
we're witnessing it, and it's I feel like I'm talking about him like he's a machine. We're witnessing him learning, right? And we've been able to see, because he's been here for so long, teams and fans don't have the opportunity to see front office members learn and grow like Philadelphia's seen Howie Roseman learn and grow. And that's testament, I think, to to Lori's and the organization as a whole, starting up at ownership and all the way down. But testament to Howie Roseman too for he had a very humbling moment that we all remember in Philadelphia, and instead of folding, or not only that, instead of folding or doubling down, he adapted, right? That's something that we just rarely see. You either see someone in that situation pick up their toys and go home, or they refuse to agree that they're and granted, he wasn't necessarily wrong and Chip Kelly was right. Chip Kelly did work in a flash. It obviously didn't work long term. More so, the truth was that Howie needed to change the way that he operated, right, as a member of the front office, as a general manager. And he did that, and he found a far more successful way. And it's been a combination of building great relationships, which not all front offices are willing to do, on top of listening to people within your cabinet, as it were, within your front office, and understanding what's important to your fan base, what's important to your players, but being able to be fluid and not necessarily tie yourself down to one philosophy, but be willing to make changes, even if where you've been as a general manager previous would suggest that you wouldn't make that decision, such as paying linebackers, paying running backs, drafting linebackers, drafting safeties, drafting corners. Like, I know it wasn't the first time the Eagles had done that as an organization, but drafting 2 corners high in the same draft, that was a different move for Philadelphia, and it immediately paid off.
And you kind of, I mean, is Howie human? Is he not a form of AI at this point? Just because he is evolving as years go, and he's just doing different things. There was a time where we weren't going to pay.
I mean, he's actual intelligence. If we're going to call him AI, can we at least call it like I feel bad like comparing it to artificial intelligence. He's actual intelligence.
There was a time where we wouldn't be paying an AJ Brown and a Devontae Smith top money to stay around. There was a time where we were a quarterback factory, and now we have the QB that we need, and it's the right guy at the helm.
Can I argue one quick point to that also?
Yeah,
just on the quarterback factory thing. There had been a narrative around Philadelphia that because, and this is what's really interesting about Howie, is that he doesn't just see something work and then spam it, right? There was that conversation, and this is particularly around Shadir Sanders, the idea of adding him, or even Jalen Milroe was another name. I'll mention him as well, that I think people had talked about in connection to Philadelphia. Bringing in one of these guys because of their talent, because of their scouted ability, bringing them in potentially the second round to back up Jalen Hurts and potentially be groomed for that position. Because Philadelphia, it whether it's not known, or I think it's more often to accurately to say it's been forgotten, Jalen Hurts was not brought in to replace Carson Wentz day one, right? Jalen Hurts was brought in to be a reliable backup who gave you a little bit of a different look. And I think Jalen Milroe is kind of similar to that type, although it's more one-to-one when you're talking about with Jalen Hurts. But when you're looking at this season compared to the season the team drafted Jalen Hurts, there were still, I think, questions around Carson Wentz, even if the public didn't know them at that time, right? We've now learned things, we've learned things since about the relationship between Carson and the locker room, between Carson and Howie Roseman, that
even the offensive coaching staff, it was bad.
Coaching staff, that there were signs, right? And they may not have been available to the public, but you have to remember that even more so than what Brian and I see, especially Brian, being there Sundays, see more so behind the scenes than maybe the general public. There's so much more that is not seen, right, by anyone, even the reporters with the most access, right? So you look into that difference, and you're going to really learn some things, but there hasn't really been, and I would argue that they just don't exist with Jalen Hurts. Like there's no question of the leadership. There's no, there's questions on the outside. Fans constantly question his ability, but no one is questioning Hurts's leadership. No one is questioning his fit with the team. There's no long-term injury questions, about Jalen Hurts, which, obviously, Carson had already torn the ACL in the past, and had been banged up at several other stints in his career. Not to mention the fact that Carson was also older than Jalen Hurts at the time, right? So compound all these things, and while the public's saying like, oh, well, they should draft a quarterback that they can start building up quarterback factory, Howie's smart enough to recognize, and I know I was going to make this quick, and now I'm on a tangent. Howie's smart enough to recognize that this is not just about, the idea of the quarterback factory is not just about getting a talented young quarterback while your primary quarterback is still in his prime, right? There needs to be situational awareness when it's time to bring in a quarterback such as that. Like when you have questions with a guy like Carson, and the fact that Jalen has not given you an opportunity to have those questions allows you to be a bit more, a bit less direct with your backup path. And they've brought in two, and I would call them exciting young backup quarterbacks. I know we haven't seen Kyle McCord play yet, but between Tanner McKee and Kyle McCord, I truly believe there are two young, interesting backups in Philadelphia, to the point where you're confident, I would argue, should Jalen Hurts go down, that you're not, it's not like you're putting Mariota out there or Mark Sanchez or what have you. You're a bit more confident than that. And if something should, heaven forbid, happen with Jalen Hurts, complete personality switch, he decides he wants out of Philadelphia, whatever have you, you're feeling at least a little bit better about the interim on, with a guy like a Kyle McCord, with a guy like a Tanner McKee, than you would if they were just going with the veteran approach and trading for a guy like a Geno Smith for a 3rd round pick or something like that. So, anyway, all that just to say, the fact that Howie has not only the ability to adapt, but also the situational awareness to know that the same answer doesn't work at every somewhat similar interval, I think shows, and not to, glaze the guy up for no reason, but I think really just shows the true intelligence of where he's grown and become as a general manager, and why he is the elite GM in the modern NFL.
I completely agree with you. It's just there's a lot of us that we know our jobs. We know our jobs in and out. We have good relationships here and there, but the guy knows more than just his job. Like he has his finger on every single post in that building, whether it's from the franchise quarterback to the backup left tackle or to the linebacker that may not make the roster. Like how he makes it his business to make sure he's very in sync with everything going on. And, years ago we said that Nick Sirianni hiring was kind of just to have the yes man for Howie and Jeffrey. Yes, that's technically true, right? But Nick does a lot of things that are great. But him being the yes man, I think, hindsight is 2020, right? Looking at it from this vantage point to how it was when he first came in, it's not a bad thing. It worked out. Like we know how he knows ball, right? But how he can't coach. Jeffrey can't, he knows his team, but Jeffrey can't do the things that Howie's doing. But all three of these guys are in such great synchronization that it works. And it's one of those things that I feel like, once the Nick Sirianni contract extension comes down the pipeline, obviously that'll be breaking news, but it won't be as surprising because it just seems like this is going to be that unit, that continuity this franchise has been wanting since we lost Andy Reid, and since we prematurely lost Andy Reid. I don't think, we're going to see a Nick Sirianni without a Howie Roseman, or a Howie Roseman without Nick Sirianni. It just feels like this is going to be that factory that we need on the back end going forward.
Yeah, and not to pound my chest for my fellow Goomba, but just for a minute here, there's a positive and a negative way to spin everything in life, right? And I think a lot of people have really gone with that yes man philosophy about Nick Sirianni, and I'm not even necessarily here attempting to disprove that. All I'm trying to say is the positive version of that negative spin is that your head coach and your front office, your ownership group, are of like-minded philosophy, right? And they're, like you mentioned it earlier, they're on the same page, and having those similar core values and being of that like-minded philosophy how is that a bad thing for your organization, right? Now I understand it can get frustrating, especially winning cures everything. So now you can say everything's great. The Eagles have won, not just the Super Bowl this past year, but they've been to 3 in the past 10 years, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I understand that everything's sunshine and roses and farts smell like flowers, but whatever. But like when you look at this organization, who you have to give due credit to what Howie Roseman's done, to what what Laurie's done, what even Nick Sirianni has done, and to understand that they're all on the same page, that they share kind of a core philosophical belief. You can't tell me that that's a bad thing, right? You can't tell me that him being that yes man because he's on the same page as them is a bad thing. I think sometimes you do need conflict. There's that inherent need for conflict for one to grow in life. I think is not even an arguable truth. I think it's an absolute truth, which there's so few of. But I think that there is enough in terms of Sirianni's self-awareness of what he feels that he believes he needs, and what the Eagles organization believes his core competencies, that you're going to get that friction that you need, and that exists on a player level, that exists on a coach level, it exists on a front office level.
If you're an NFL fan or even an Eagles fan, I would say over the next 2 years, over the next 2 years, keep your eyes on the Dallas Cowboys, because Jerry Jones, my apologies, Jerry Jones hired his own version of a yes man. But see how dysfunctional that's going to look in comparison to how functional this looks from top to bottom. I mean, yes, we all question what Big Dom's job it truly is, but he has his hands everywhere as well, and he fits the mold. Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman, when they're at the press conferences together, they look like they can have their own podcast. Like they have that camaraderie, they have that brotherhood already established. See how it's gonna look in Dallas, because I feel like Jerry Jones is trying to replicate what the Eagles have, and they may have talent on the roster, but I'm curious to see how that dynamic is gonna work, because we know Jeffrey can step in. We know he wants his QB stats. We know he wants his certain things to look a certain way. How he wants certain things to look a certain way, right? How he controls a lot of the roster decisions, which a lot of people don't agree with, right? It works in synchronization here. You don't hear a peep out of anybody being disgruntled about it, like you did during Doug Peterson's time. See how it's gonna look in Dallas, because they're trying to replicate that formula, and it doesn't look like it's gonna mesh very well going in and out of season after season over there. But to close out the show a bit, I know that I mentioned in the chat that this wasn't one of the sexiest drafts. It wasn't the most glorious drafts, but looking
John
from
Ken
top
was
to bottom,
pretty fucking sexy, man. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I'm gushing over that pick just because
On and off the field.
I can't wait to see how he's gonna look, and then him and Zach Bond. I mean, oh my, I can't wait to see how this defense is gonna look. I'm a little surprised that they didn't add a playmaker for the offense, being that they declined Jahan Dotson's option. I would have thought maybe you had a speedster just to kind of develop. But it's I'm in no position to question what they're doing.
Smith's still here, and Liam still gave him an A grade for that draft pick last year. So they have to develop him, or I don't know what Liam's gonna do.
Just another John Hightower. But looking at the draft from top to bottom, how would you grade this class of the Eagles draft picks?
Yeah, so I was on the post draft show with Liam, and that was kind of the immediate, what's your feeling? He asked me the same question, and in the moment, I gave it an A minus. I think the more that I've been able to kind of marinate on the selections, who they chose, who fell, looking at the undrafted pool as well, I'm probably staying where I'm at, but I'm just more confident in it, right? I was flirting kind of between a B plus and an A minus, and in my eyes, the value of the lineman they got, how specifically talking about Williams and specifically talking about Hollins as well, is that you get that incredible value, and you get that value in a Campbell as well, as opposed to your draft position. I didn't love the Makuba pick at first. I will be honest and admit
It
that
wasn't a
part of
sexy
it.
pick.
What's that?
It wasn't a sexy pick because we know Watts was up there. We
Well,
know.
I mean, I think he's got his appeal, but the problem for me is that when your draft darling goes the very next pick after your team's pick, and that's Darius Alexander from Toledo went to the the Giants.
Oh yeah, the Giants.
You're gonna hold that against the team, right? At least in the short term. I've been able to kind of separate myself from the moment, think a little bit more on what Makuba is gonna be able to bring, but not only that, also being able to see what the Eagles did later on, bringing in Ty and thinking about, well, he doesn't necessarily have the versatility, of Darius Alexander, but Ty Robinson, I think, has a better north-south ability than him, which I think is something that Philadelphia is going to be able to utilize. So, just thinking about all these things together, I feel pretty confident now with that A- ranking, and I think that's where I'm going to stay.
I don't see why you wouldn't give him A minus. I respect that. I wasn't happy with the draft at the end of the draft. I was happy with Jihad. I was happy with Andrew once I kind of studied a little bit more. I was even happy with Ty. But the offensive lineman threw me off a bit because it was kind of like, are you just drafting to draft, like select a pick? Just because you had so many picks in this draft, and you have 13 or 12 or 13 in next year's draft. But after looking at everything, even at the undrafted free agents, I'm like, damn, like this is how you keep a team on a championship run. Like this is exactly what you're supposed to do. You're supplementing the pieces that were on voids. You lost to Darius Slay, you lost Josh Sweat, you lost Milton Williams, you lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Those are key pieces on this defense. You replace them with Makuba, and you also already have Sidney Brown in place at cornerback. I think a lot of people are gonna be very surprised at the fact that Keely Ringo may not be that guy for them that people are saying he's going to be in CB2. I actually think this kid Max McWilliams is Mac McWilliams could be a pretty surprising starter at some point this season. Then Ty Robinson, I feel like he's gonna be that. He's gonna be part of the exciting whites, and he's gonna be that game wrecker in the middle of the interior defensive line. And it's like all these pieces they're making way too much sense. And what you just said with the the offensive tackles, like having a guy for the left tackle be the future, or the right tackle be the future. Like it's hard to say, like, this is not how is this draft not an A or A plus? Like this is exactly what championship teams should be doing. You should be replenishing, your pieces that you're lacking talent or lacking youth in. Like you should be doing you should be getting a Jihad Campbell, to replace a guy like Zach Bond in the future, to be better than Zach Bond. Like these are the moves you should be making. And it was just it wasn't the sexiest draft, but it was the right draft. It was the right class for this team going into into 25 season. Their offensive players are all locked in. Nobody's going nowhere. We did not trade AJ Brown for the number 4 overall pick for a player that wasn't going to be there. This team is locked in and they're loaded for for a rerun in 2025. And I'm very impressed with how he did. He kept his composure. He didn't panic. He didn't reach for anybody. I feel like everybody fell into his lap that it's either he wanted or somebody that he felt like he can make something out of. It was a very good and consistent draft, I could say.
What do you do when you take the last soda out of the fridge? You replenish it. And that's what Howie Roseman is doing with this offensive line, right? And we've barely even talked about Drew Kendall tonight, right? Who Drew Kendall, I think, could have the most immediate impact of any of these offensive linemen. You think about, well, he's a center. Well, he's what's going to happen to Cam Jurgens? Nothing in my mind. But remember, Cam Jurgens did have his injury issues last season.
Yeah,
and on top of
back
that,
surgery, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, back surgery at the end of the season, right?
Correct. Drew Kendall also is guard versatile, right? So that added ability, especially with the big question mark at right guard, I'm not necessarily saying that they're going to come out here and this 5th-round pick is now going to start at right guard this year for the Eagles. But what I am saying is that if they do need someone in a pinch, whether it's to back up Landon, who has injury history, whether it's to back up Cam, who now has an injury history, or the right guard position, who you're just not overly secure about, well, you have someone who can do that not only this year but in the years moving forward. And I would argue I rather liked Tyler Steen, right? Does not seem the Eagles feel that way. So if I am just looking at the offensive linemen who are currently on the roster for Philadelphia, and I'll admit too, I am a rather large fan of Trevor Keegan. I still would argue that Drew Kendall probably has the best chance to become that starting right guard eventually of those, any lineman not named Trevor or Tyler Steen, I should say.
And he owes value because he's one of the only other players besides Landon Dickinson and Cam that can actually snap the ball.
Yeah, well, that's that's added value.
It was definitely a good draft, and it was a good draft weekend. If you guys were actually paying attention to the PSN streams, we gave you guys all we had from written articles, from streams, and I hope you guys all enjoyed that. Is there, before we wrap up, now the draft being done, is there one free agent addition that you expect this team to make in the coming months?
Right, so
to fill a need.
That's obviously tough because we haven't seen training camp yet. So we have to go through training camp. We have to go through, the cuts to see, because I think there are going to be players once we get through that. There's going to be names that Philadelphia looks to add. I think they're going to pick apart the waiver wire effectively, right? But if you're looking at just the list of players who are currently available, I mean, you mentioned the need for a wide receiver. I think they're pretty set there. I frankly don't know if there's a need out there, if I'm being honest. Even for a veteran safety, I think that's the one argument that you can make. And is it Jesse Bates who's available?
Justin Simmons is available, as well as
Simmons. That's
Julian
the big
Blackman
who's available. It's Justin Simmons. So that's the the only name that I can think of who they could. It kind of feels almost like inevitable in a sense, as it kind of always did. To see Justin Simmons come to Philadelphia, but we'll see what happens. But I think in every other position, I feel rather confident. I think part of you talked about Dallas Goedert to begin the podcast, right? Before I got on, right?
Yeah.
Just to talk about that real fast. I don't see Dallas Goedert going anywhere. If he did, I could see them trying to, find whatever corpse in the tight end market they could. Which if
they signed 2 already. I mean,
okay, yeah, but did they? But did they? Like
they signed the contract and they got money, but did they?
they signed the contract, but like, is Kylan Granson going to come in here and he's going to start as tight end for Harrison Bryant?
Like, you asked me
starting tight ends for the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, I don't think so, man.
You asked me last week or the week before how I felt about Grant Calcaterra, right? I feel like he could be a starting tight end in this league until they draft that guy, right? And he's serviceable. He did very well when Goddard was out this season, and he has that connection with Jalen Hurts from back to the college days, and it worked very well. You plug him in with a guy like a Harrison Bryant, or whoever. I forget the other kid's name that they signed.
Kylan Grayson. I just said it.
Yes, sorry. You pair him with one of those 2 guys, or even all 3 of those guys, and you have a serviceable tight end group. Because if we're being honest, like, they don't use tight ends that much anymore. Like, they really don't. It's AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, and then you run the ball with Saquon. Like, that's literally been their MO for the last 2 or 3 years.
Listen, I like Grant Calcaterra. Had they drafted a tight end this year, I would probably feel differently, right? But the thing is, they did not draft a tight end this year. I am not confident whatsoever in either of the 2 tight ends, Harrison Bryant or Kylan Granson that they brought in. I am somewhat confident in Calcaterra as a support piece, but he either needs to back up a better tight end like a Dallas Goedert, or he needs to be the primary over a rookie tight end in my belief, right? So the other part of this equation is where's Dallas Goedert going to go? Like that's you almost hate to say that because it sounds like, mean, corporate, antagonistic, like, we've got you by your balls. But like you look at this offseason, like
But it's Josh Sweat all over again. It's literally Josh Sweat all over again. He had nowhere to go.
But Josh Sweat eventually did find somewhere to go. But like this season, like so the Bears, Colts, Jets, Rams, Seahawks, and Titans all drafted legitimate tight ends in the first 4 rounds of the draft, 4 or 5 rounds.
And the Bears already have a legitimate tight end on.
Bears already had with Cole Kmet. They already had another starting tight end there. So you look at winning teams, and I'm arguing winning teams because you're just coming off the Super Bowl. Only a winning team is going to pay for a tight end like a Dallas Goedert. And when I say pay, I mean pay. Because mind you, he's making money with the Eagles. It's not guaranteed as of yet. It will be past a certain date. But it's not like they're saying, like, we want you to sign for $3. Like, it's obviously a big cut from where he's currently at. But you have to think about, well, what's he going to make on the open market, right? Because if they cut him without, I believe he's completely unguaranteed at the moment. Is that correct?
I'm checking right now, actually.
So, you think about the difference of what he's going to lose on the open market, versus what he can remain with in Philadelphia. And looking here, dead cap it's 11 million, but that doesn't sound right. Oh, there's an option. There's a potential out. Okay, I see here. So there's the potential out. So yeah, I don't think this is guaranteed at all then.
And I think that's the issue is because he wants guaranteed money, but David mentioned that they have some. The option is like for 14 mil, if I'm not mistaken. 14 mil guaranteed. David mentioned that the decision has to be made soon if they don't want Goddard. Like they're obviously not gonna pay him that money. So, like you're mentioning, like, what are the options? Where are you going?
Where is he going to go? Where he's going to get that same amount of money, whatever they agree on, where he's going to get that same amount of money, that the comfort of being where you like currently live, and on top of that, like being able to actually compete. Like, there's very few teams out there. I mean, you could argue potentially the LA Chargers, where you're having that good, quality of life on top of potential money on top of.
But don't they have two tight ends over there?
I'm not overly in love with their tight ends, but
Hunter Henry and
the Chargers?
Yeah. Or no, Hunter's in New England.
Yeah, he's in New England. Yeah, no, so the Chargers have Will Dissly and Tyler Conklin, and I'm not like I'm taking Dallas Goedert over both of those guys.
So really quick, Dallas Goedert carries a cap hit of $11 million for 2025, but the Eagles can save $4.1 million by cutting or trading him after June 1st.
I mean, if you're me, like, negotiate that his contract down to like 7 or whatever, guarantee it. And so the Eagles, like, they're not gaining or losing any more money, and Dallas is getting far more money than he's getting on the open market to have a starting tight end role on the Super Bowl champions who are looking to compete yet again. Like, this isn't like a team who was gutted. The Eagles are gonna be competing for a Super Bowl next season, right? So, you look at, and Ron talks about these teams with young QBs, that can use Goddard as a security blanket. Do you want an injury-prone tight end as your security blanket first and foremost? And then on top of that, going over the teams that I had just mentioned, the Titans just drafted a tight end, and they have a half-decent starting tight end already. They drafted, obviously, Cam Ward first overall pick. The Browns drafted a tight end. The Seahawks, who brought in Jalen Milroe, even though he's not necessarily going to start this year, they brought in a tight end as well. The Bears, who have Caleb Williams, now have 2 tight ends, right? So, you're looking at some of these teams with these young quarterbacks across the league. The Patriots, I think, have multiple tight ends. Between Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. So, they're already set there. So where is this young quarterback who?
What about the Browns?
The Browns drafted a tight end this year, and they have David Njoku.
Damn, you really had no options.
So yeah, I mean, between Njoku and Fandon, like, where's Dallas Goedert fitting on the Browns depth chart, right?
I mean, the Miami Marlins need somebody, I think.
Well,
the
I don't
H.
think he can play shortstop, but that we can see if Dallas can play short. But other than that, if you're looking there, like you can argue it, but Johnny Smith, I think, is more reliable at this point than Dallas Goedert. His peaks aren't as high, but
But he's
Johnny
healthy.
Smith has proven to be a bit of a reliable tight end. You could argue maybe as a second option, but now you're arguing him as the number two, like, or at least 1A or 1B alongside Johnny Smith, as opposed to the clear cut number one for the Philadelphia Eagles.
It's in his best. We know it's in his best interest to stay, right? But the issue with Dallas is that George Kittle just signed a wild deal where George Kittle is going to get paid, I think, what, $19 million a year at age 30, 31. I think he's older than Dallas. So Goddard's in a situation where you're at the peak end of your career where you got to make the most money you possibly can because you've already won a Super Bowl. You've won a ton of games in Philadelphia. You've done your thing. You're not as healthy. Like, it's weird that him and Vontae Maddox just couldn't stay healthy for a full season throughout their careers. It feels like.
Well, considering their best friendship, it really is. Like the comparisons between the two is shocking. But to respond to the George Kittle thing really quick, and I understand there's that sense of pride in the NFL, and you only have such a window to make money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dallas Goedert should be in the position where he arguably makes puts himself in the best position to succeed this year, which you could argue that maybe looking for more touches elsewhere is the answer. But again, where is that team, right? So in terms of Philadelphia, like, this is likely your best position to succeed because if you stay healthy for the whole season, with a competitive playoff team playing a major role, teams will recognize that. But you can't compare yourself necessarily to George Kittle. You're talking about, a number one tight end, effectively in the league, like, in terms of his statistics that he put up last year, compared to a guy who, sat in the bottom third of the league. I mean, like, you look at the receptions, 78 to 42. Look at the yards, 1,100 to 500. Touchdowns, you're talking 8-2. Like, Dallas Goedert, unfortunately, just did not compare to George Kittle last season. So I understand the reason, like, you look at the top guy get paid, you want to get paid. That's just how the NFL works. He's got to compare himself to similar guys, like-minded guys. So you look at free agency this past year and, you look at some of the tight ends and where they signed. And I think you're going to find a little bit more of a comparative avenue for you there. If you look more so, and again, remember the injuries as well. So you can't even necessarily compare him to like an Evan Ingram who went out and he's making over 10 million, a year this year. I think you have to look more so at a guy like, well, Tyler Conklin, who's been dealing with injuries as of late. He's on a 1 year, $3 million deal. Like, that's the area where I think you have to look, is like these guys who are getting probably that like 5, 6, 7 million. I think that's just much more where his value lies. And so, Philadelphia is probably trying to make the most out of their opportunity and say, like, well, let's get you lower your money lower than that guaranteed number. Like, we'll give it to you all up front, but I don't understand. Like, he's not going to make more than that 7 million, right? That you mentioned. Just get him down to that 7 million, maybe even add in some unlikely incentives that he can strive for at that case. Makes the deal look even bigger, and go from there. But you can't, or even, work it so there's a second year added in potentially. But that's
a little clear option.
Yeah, I mean, like Dallas Goedert, like, you want to take care of your players, and we've seen that. And I understand that he might feel some type of way seeing Saquon Barkley get paid after 1 year. But again, like, you're comparing yourself to the wrong people if he's feeling that way. Like, you can't compare yourself to the George Kittles and Saquon Barkleys because, with all due respect, you're Dallas Goedert and you just didn't play at that level last year, So you have to think about what's the best situation for Dallas Goedert. That's not necessarily the most money this year. That's what will give me the most money this year and put me in the best position to succeed in the upcoming remaining years of my career. And whether that's from a legacy standpoint, a money standpoint, what have you, these are all parts of the equation that he has to think about. And the Eagles organization has to think about how this makes them look in the long term as well, right? You're talking about a guy who's played his entire career here. He's played 7 years as a Philadelphia Eagle. Peak for peak, he's one of the most exciting tight ends the organization has ever had, right? I get that he hasn't had it with the longevity, and I get he's missed a handful of games. I think in every season but his rookie year. He's missed at least one game, right? Even still, this is a longtime player who probably is going to be around the organization for years to come after. He's won 2 Super Bowls with the team, or I guess 1 Super Bowl with the team. He came in the year after the Super Bowl. He's won 1 Super Bowl with the team, been to 2. You're going to want to take care of this guy at least in some degree. Like, is the difference between like $1 million, $500,000 now going to be worth all of that negative press over it? Just between the two sides, just figure it out. Move forward, and ride out with Goddard and Calcaterra this year. Bring in someone in the draft, and if you want to go draft Calcaterra next year, I'm more than confident with that. But you have to go out and you have to get somebody in the first 4 rounds of the draft next year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Dallas Goedert. I mean, you got to get in where you fit in, and right now he fits in Philadelphia, and the Eagles could use him because he did come down for them, come up clutch for them down the stretch. He had that one game against the Saints where he was the entire offense because they were missing A.J. Brown and Devontae wasn't really productive at that time. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how they handle this contract situation in the coming days. They also do have to pick up Jordan Davis's player option, which is coming up in the coming days. Who else? No, that the 2 first-round picks was Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith. That they came out with a year after, if I'm mistaken, right? Okay. Yeah. So, are we going to see the Eagles pick up a player option for Jordan Davis or extend him on a cheap deal that's going to benefit them in the long run? They have some big decisions to make after a pretty incredible draft weekend, pretty awesome free agency period, and it's been ongoing for them. They haven't had a chance to just breathe. They did visit the White House on Monday, so things just keep on trending for them. But like I said, it's gonna be an interesting couple of days, couple of months. We're gonna be here to cover all that for you guys, week in, week out. I think we're only doing 1 episode this week. It may change on Friday, it may not change, but I do want to thank you all for tuning in to PSN this weekend, sticking by us, for every draft stream and sticking by us as well as every show that we've had, from our hockey show, our Philly show, to even our Eagles shows now. We appreciate you guys, and yeah.
Can I make one small announcement?
Uh-oh.
So
but you're too young to retire, right?
Yeah, I don't feel it, but yes. Okay. So we just talking about Philly shows, PSN shows. While we are talking about that, there is going to be an exciting event coming up for those in the Philadelphia area, May 12th. We are actually going to be having a lottery draft party for the Sixers, right? So obviously there's no guarantee that the Sixers have their pick as of yet, but the odds are looking favorable for Philadelphia. So whether they thrive or fall into a further pit of misery, we'll all be together that night at least. More details to come, but we are going to have that lottery draft party in Philly on May 12th. That's Monday, May 12th. I know it's a Monday, but that's when they choose to have the lottery. So, come out Monday night, support us. We'll have more details on that soon. And what's exciting about the end of that is that following the results of the draft lottery, there will be a call it new, call it returning. It's probably somewhere in between Sixers show being added to the PSN network of podcasts and YouTube live streams. So just something to look forward to for May 12th coming up.
I'm definitely going to want to hear more information on that one, but it looks like it'll be a good time. I've personally checked out on basketball. So, and
that's what the drinks are for. If you checked out on basketball or if they lose the draft pick, we're going to be in a bar. So you have that to look forward to if nothing else.
Celebrating a pick with a drink. Oh, we can't lose in that situation. But yeah, until next week, I'm Brian Cameron alongside Zach Chavalella, and we're flipping the birds.
Go Birds, baby.
Yes, sir.
Flip